You ready to get started? Light this bitch? Start this candle?
No.
Are you withholding podcasting?
I'm done with your silly little show. I'm big enough now. I want to do my own show. I'm going to crush yours. I'm going to rank number 30.
Really? Bring it on. Today is March 9th, 2015, and this is episode 108 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. How are you, sir?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good. As you said the date, I glanced up at my calendar in my office, and it's still in February, and I didn't realize that at first, so I was very confused.
I'm here for you, man.
And this just tells me that I clearly am not attending to my, office needs enough. Because I have to go to an office now, so my home office is deeply neglected.
It's falling into disrepair.
It is. There's probably cobwebs around here and, sad dust bunnies in the corner. But, oh well, such is life. Anyway, how are you? How's things? What's up? What's new and exciting?
Things are good. Talked to Bob a little bit. Got some Bob. Yeah, I got a Bob story that goes with one of our stories tonight. So
excellent.
That should be fun.
Is he back from Iran? He was over there doing negotiations, I thought.
Yeah, he's back for a little bit. He'll be headed out to North Korea soon, I think.
Again?
Man. Yep.
He does get around. And I'm sorry we're a day late on the show. That's my fault. My girlfriend demanded a new stove, and that sort of took precedence. There's
a joke in there somewhere.
There is. I set you up for it. I set you up for it.
Anyway. Yes, so we're 20 short episodes away from the grand spectacle of episode 128.
That's true.
So we got to get on the stick and figure out what we're going to do for that.
Well, for the moment, I got to get through B-Sides Atlanta.
That's right. Oh, yes. So speaking of that, B-Sides Atlanta this Saturday, March, what the heck date is that? March 14th. That's right. Mm-hmm. In Atlanta. I have no idea where. We'll figure that out later. Mr. Callett will be speaking.
Yes, my talk did get accepted. And it's going to be a rough, difficult talk to give. And probably not the easiest talk to hear. I'll give that warning for everybody, but I think it's an important talk. And apparently the organizers agreed with me.
Yes. So much so that they turned down two of my talks, one of which may very well be the most epic InfoSec talk of all time.
I don't think they were prepared to handle that level of epicness.
Obviously not. I mean, truth be told, you have to have special accommodations for that particular kind of talk. And I would actually say that talk is probably best held outdoors, not indoors. But, there you go. Maybe someday we can do one in Denver at Red Rocks,
Sure, yeah.
That'd be cool.
It's true.
That'd be cool. All right, so the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employer, past, present, or future.
Good disclaimer. And before we get off the B-Sides topic.
Oh, yes.
There is a B-Sides after party that Jerry and I will be hanging out at. So for we're up to 24 listeners now. If any of our 24 listeners are coming to B-Sides Atlanta, of course, you'll see us around the con, but afterwards, come have a beer with us at Gordon Biersch. And again, all of the details are on the B-Sides Atlanta 2015 page. If you find, one of those search engine thingies, you could probably get more details.
And I'll stick it in the show notes.
Yes.
Too.
So we tweeted out that we were going to do something at Twin Peaks. That is no longer happening. Ignore that tweet.
Don't take the brown Peaks. LSD. Oh, no, that was something else.
No, different. You're welcome to go to Twin Peaks. Don't get us wrong. And you may enjoy it. It might be a fine place. But we will not be there. And that may be why you're going, because we're not there. I don't know. But I'm just saying, if you're going there expecting us to be there, we won't be there.
We'll be at where?
Gordon Biersch.
There you go. And where the hell is that?
It's around the corner. It's like across the street and down a little bit. It's so that the B-Sides is in Buckhead, for those who know the Atlanta area, and Gordon Biersch is also in Buckhead. So it's nearby. There are tools to find these things. I don't know why, we're wasting precious podcast minutes talking about things that Google Maps could tell you.
I know. So
it's because you started drinking early for the show.
I am definitely feeling it.
And I am stone cold sober, just home from the gym. So,
yes.
Whatever. Somehow we'll make it through.
Whatever.
All right.
I'm gonna play some music after. We're gonna dub in some music. Use your imagination. All right. So yes, stories. That's why we're here, isn't it? We have a podcast that has stories. Our first story tonight comes from Ars Technica, and the title is, Uber's epic database blunder is hardly an exception. GitHub is awash in passwords. So, I think hopefully many people are aware of the story. Uber kind of flamed out in grand fashion. It was really a crazy thing. So the story goes that Uber has somewhere around 50,000 drivers. I don't know if this is all their drivers or a subset of their drivers. Anyway, they lost the database. That database contained some pretty sensitive information, driver's licenses and that sort of stuff. It was stolen. And so what went really weird after that was that Uber subpoenaed GitHub for the list of IP addresses that accessed a particular GitHub page. And at the time, there was a lot of speculation and rumor about what the heck that was all about. And as it turns out, somebody in Uber had uploaded a config file that contained, I'm assuming it's a config file, that contained a key that allowed the database to be stolen. And so apparently the forces that be inside Uber were trying to put on their Sherlock Holmes hat and go track down the whodunit using the list of IP addresses from GitHub that accessed this key. Now, I will say I have no clue exactly what this key is. They're really obtuse about that point. I don't know if it's an SSH key or if it's... I don't know. So, anyhow.
Could it have been Rick Moranis running around looking for,
It could have been.
I mean...
Whatever. You are so getting me off track.
Because I'm making references to movies released in the early 80s.
Not tonight, man. I think the bigger story here is that this is not an uncommon problem.
Nope.
There are, as I understand it, GitHub has, a fairly robust process where they try to go and look for passwords and API keys and stuff like that, and then notify people. But one thing that has come out is that there's a lot of automated crawlers.
This whole story reminds me a lot of back in the day, Johnny Long wrote a book, or series of books, and a bunch of blog posts about Google hacking, where you could craft really interesting Google queries to find all sorts of neat things, like passwords and web pages that got indexed that shouldn't have been. And it feels very similar on GitHub, where you can do searches for people's login credentials and other things that are hard-coded into code that they've posted up on GitHub.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, maybe there's a book deal in this for somebody.
But I think the takeaway is to look at your development process, and I can't imagine there's a ton of, well, I guess Uber does, right? Never mind. I was going to say something really dumb. Like not a lot of companies do this, but I think there's a lot of companies that do this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of companies that do this.
So yeah, go talk to your developers, make sure they're not doing this. Put it, somehow work it into the development process where, they segregate out this kind of information from what gets uploaded.
Well, yay cloud.
Well, that's true.
But I think this, is part of secure development lifecycle.
Yeah.
And knowing how you're handling your code.
Yeah.
And, to be fair, once again, and this is a common problem, developers don't think security typically. They just don't. They don't. It's not apparently how their brain works.
No. I
And
mean, they turn off their AV and then they upload the passwords.
But, this kind
I'm sorry, by the way, I would just like to apologize to all the developers I offended. That was a joke. It was not serious. Mostly. Anyway, go ahead.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're not going to apologize to, the AV vendors you insulted, just the developers?
Correct.
What about the developers of the AV?
That's a really unfortunate position.
Anyway, if you don't kind of keep an eye on what your developer's doing and teach them this stuff, you're going to have this kind of stuff
Absolutely.
continually slipping out into the world through your fingers like greasy fish sticks. They're just going to fall out, and then bad things will happen.
So moving on to our next story, which comes from CSOonline.com. The title is 5 Steps to Incorporate Threat Intelligence into Your Security Awareness Program. I learned a ton out of this from this article, by the way. I mean, a ton. And I'm trying to find the exact quote, but I'm going to paraphrase because I can't find it. And it basically says that threat intelligence has identified every single attack before it happened, and how it was going to happen, and who was going to be targeted, and how they were going to be targeted, and therefore we should incorporate threat intelligence into our security awareness program so that when our threat intelligence program identifies that the Syrian Electronic Army is going to come after our director of marketing by sending them an email at 6 a.m. in the morning, we can go to the director of marketing and have him or her be ready and resist the attempts. So it's a really innovative idea. What say you?
I'm still sitting here dumbfounded. Threat intelligence. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
I'm just reading the article.
Yeah. So I'm going to quote from the article as well. For example, and I'm quoting now, for example, when IDG, the parent company, was attacked by the Syrian Electronic Army, threat intelligence predicted the attacks, defined the attack vectors, and identified the countermeasures that should be implemented. So this article, although the first part of this article doesn't actually match up with the second part of this article, which is kind of funny, is basically saying, and again I'm quoting, awareness programs should incorporate threat intelligence, which provides digestible products of continuous adversary monitoring, organized research, and threat analysis. The result is a timely and actionable information about the likely attack vectors and targets of your potential and actual attackers. This intelligence can be made compelling and relatable to audiences seeing similar attacks in the news.
So, I have to say, and to take off my silly drunk cat for a second, this really hit home with the book, The Signal and the Noise. Right?
Yeah.
Where in hindsight,
we should make the point first.
Go ahead.
The point is, if threat intelligence were this good at predicting attacks, clearly the bad guys are doing something incredibly wrong. The threat intelligence vendors are far better than anyone has given them credit for. And three, if you're waiting for threat intelligence to tell you what the attack is and then deploy the countermeasures, as this article states, why haven't you already deployed those countermeasures? Why are you waiting until threat intelligence tells you somebody's about to do something?
I'm of two minds on that. I can understand the point they're trying to make. However, I think there is a signal in the noise kind of argument here that says, yes, it's very reasonable to go back and look, prior to an attack and see, the signal amongst the noise that you should have picked out. But any company of any reasonable size can't chase after every single, they can't go down every single rat hole that is going to pop up. And, you should, like you said, you should be doing due diligence. But I do think there are probably some things. If you had really actionable intelligence, you knew that the Syrian Electronic Army was going to be attacking you next week. There's some
How would you know that?
Well,
how is that viable?
I'm suspending disbelief, right?
All right.
For a second. So let's just assume that you have perfect information that the Syrian Electronic Army is absolutely going to target you. I think that would prescribe some actions that you could do to help defend your organization. However, you're not going to have that perfect information.
Shouldn't you already be in the state of assuming you're going to be attacked by the Syrian Electronic Army? I mean, unless you're willing to degrade operational capability. In other words, for a short period of time, I'm going to turn off something that I wouldn't normally turn off. Wouldn't the countermeasure that you put in place be there supposedly, in theory, already anyway? What are you going to do differently? This is my problem with this threat intelligence concept of trying to predict an attack. What are you going to do differently? This is the same problem with attribution. What are you going to do differently? And if you're following bad threat intelligence to do something differently, what are you not doing as a result? What is that distracting you from?
Right.
Aren't you better off looking at what data you have that's most likely to be attacked and defending that data from all comers?
Whatever. You're like Mr. Pragmatic tonight.
You're Mr. Lit. That's what you are. I had a cranky day, I'm sure. today. But, the rest of this article actually has some interesting reminders of stuff, right, from a security awareness standpoint. But I just feel like this article had a whole bunch of FUD put together by threat intelligence vendors about, look how awesome we are. We can predict that bad guys are coming at you. When I just don't think that's real.
I don't. Maybe for a very narrow sector of the economy that might make sense, and but in general, I think you're spot on. And I also think, by the way, again, I happen to work at a very large company, and the battleship turns very slowly. It's a very large investment to do things, and so you have to be very strategic about what you are going to do in terms of, even awareness training. It is when you have 500,000 people. You don't do that in a week, right? That is it doesn't happen like that. And at the same time, you kind of you're being attacked by everybody.
Right.
And so, maybe it makes a lot of sense for a really small company or a parking garage, right? Maybe in that context you can, but you can spin your chair around and tell Joe to not open that other email he just got.
And I believe that there are if there's threat intelligence folks out there who are listening to this screaming at their podcast playback device of, hey, we are broken into these forms and we see these attacks and we can warn people. I have no doubt that there are folks out there on the defense side who are able to monitor chatter and information of certain groups and know who they're about to hit. But I think that is a 5 percentile coverage at best of the industry. And if that is your reliance, if you're hoping that your threat intel vendor just happens to be monitoring the right group at the right time, and that's what you're relying upon, you're missing 95% plus of your attackers.
Yeah, so, which basically says you have to. Yeah, you need to do your due diligence. You need to be protecting your environment.
So this is the rough part, right? Because a threat intel vendor could come to you and say, "We have stopped all of these attacks," but that's out of context,
right?
Because you don't know how many attacks they missed.
Yeah,
right. We're watching all these things, and we know when they're about to do this, that, and the other thing. Great. Nobody can tell you what they're not watching,
right?
So to the threat intel vendor, they think they're doing awesome work, right? They're doing God's work there, and they're helping their customers. And maybe, they believe it. It's true. And to a customer, they're like, yeah, great. We we've got this company out there who's trolling the underground looking for people talking about us. So we've got that. I just don't think there's nobody, maybe short of, nation state level monitoring of everything, complete take stuff, who could tell you with any degree of certainty, even half of the attacks are coming at you before they come at you.
The other thing I've been thinking about is, in my never-ending quest to become an economist, is that, economic theory would say that the success, even if threat intelligence vendors come up with a way to be highly successful, it's going to be short-lived because the adversaries will adapt, through things like disinformation, misinformation, and, obscuring their tracks and stuff like that. So, it's an interesting thing. I do know that there are a lot of people who really do believe they derive a lot of value from their threat intelligence vendor. I will also say that part of our problem is that threat intelligence, if you ask, 10 people what threat intelligence means, you'll get 10 very different answers. So, we also have a challenge of terminology and scope. So,
yeah. So, was there more to this article that you wanted to talk about?
No, not really. I guess except to say that we often talk a lot about the technical aspects of attacks. But, I was talking with my good friend Bob, and he was telling me a story from a couple of months ago about a breach that resulted from a help desk scam, right? And that's not a technical problem, right? This is good old-fashioned social engineering, and he wanted me to pass along to our listener population that don't ignore that threat, right? Because you can have really robust controls, and if someone can call up your help desk and convince them to help them out, it's all for naught. So you'll be in the news anyway.
So what you're saying is your help desk should be less helpful.
It's unfortunate, but that is kind of a necessary side effect.
Yeah, one of the stories that I'm going to talk about is this duality or this tension between customer service and security. Right. And rigid process versus empowering customer service reps to deal with a quote-unquote angry customer.
Right. So I guess with that, let's go ahead and move into that story.
Yeah, this is one that actually kind of a last-minute addition to the show, so I'll kind of tee it up and run it through it here. But it was this isn't a corporate thing, but it was a really interesting walkthrough of an individual who got badly owned overnight, and it's from The Verge, TheVerge.com. It's called Anatomy of a Hack, and it's about a guy, Partap Davis, who overnight somebody completely owned all of his social media, all of his basically email accounts, his Bitcoin, and lost about $3,000 overnight. And it was pretty clever. Now, this guy is not your average, random user. He actually tried to do the right thing and really tried to have everything set up. He had two-factor set up for Gmail. He had all sorts of various authenticator stuff set up for various accounts. And it's a very interesting long article, but this all started with somebody breaking his initial email at mail.com. And the theory, though we don't know for sure, is that mail.com had some sort of hole in the password reset capabilities, and that there was a known underworld exploit out there to go after mail.com that was potentially unpatched at the time.
That's MAIL, not MALE, right?
Correct. Thank you.
Got it.
Yes. And it's not manpages.com. That's where you go when you want to learn things about Linux commands.
Yes, that's right.
Right. So, first thing the bad guy does, and they don't know who did it, they still don't know, is went after this particular victim's mail.com account, somehow broke it, reset the password, logged in. We don't know exactly how, but once they did that, they then started to go down the path of all this other stuff and very smartly got everything they needed in the course of just a couple of hours. So once they got in, the next thing they did was go to AT&T to take over the person's phone number. So went to AT&T.com, did password reset, which sent, of course, the secure link down to the mail.com account, which the bad guy already owned. Once inside the account, had all the information, called up a customer service rep and at AT&T and had all of the phone calls forwarded now to a burner number out of Long Beach. So, at this point, now any phone calls coming into the victim's phone is being forwarded. However, texts and whatnot are still going to the original phone. But every phone call was going to the attacker. Next, they went after Google. With Google, he had two-factor authentication set up. And the second factor was a 6-digit code being texted to the phone. However, Google is very helpful. It has blind customers or sight-impaired customers. So Google has this handy little capability of, instead of texting you, it will call you and verbally read you the numbers. And since the bad guy had access to all the inbound phone calls, that's what they did. So instead of having the second factor texted, he did call forwarding and had the accessibility call and read the number of the phone. At that point, they can now reset the password. And at that point, now had Google. Then moved on to Coinbase, which is where he had his Bitcoins. And again, they used, he had two-factor set up. He had Authy, which is an app on the phone. But once they had the phone repointed and had mail.com and a new confirmation code, in essence, just reloaded the app, reset the app, logged in again, said, nope, my app's over on this new phone now, and now could do Authy account, moved under their control. So they go after the Coinbase using Authy and mail.com, transfer the full balance out, and then transferred again, and the money was gone. There's more to it, but long story short, even with two-factor authentication, there were holes in this process, and it really was leveraging, in essence, services offered by these various companies to make life easier for certain users and customer service reps trying to be helpful, and one fail point at the initial email account. And that's how quickly this stuff unravels. And I think this is relevant to a corporate environment, being able to do this kind of stuff very easily.
Yeah.
And so even with two-factor, even with all this stuff that we think is making us secure, you still have to think about how are ways people could subvert this? Where are the weaknesses in the system?
Right.
And it's a really interesting read-through and worth reading and thinking about.
I really like the way when you scroll through the article, it kind of highlights the schematic of the timeline of the attack. It's pretty neat. So yeah, it's definitely, it looks like a good read. So hopefully our listeners get something out of it.
So anyway, I just came across it today. I think one of our listeners happened to tweet it out, and I should be giving him credit, and I forgot who it was, so I suck. I'm sorry.
We'll find out who that was and give him internet points later. So our next article also comes from CSO Online, and the title is "Drive-by Attack Relies on Hacked GoDaddy Accounts." So pretty clever deal. This is an attack called domain shadowing, and what it essentially involves is the attackers, through a variety of different mechanisms, gain access to the control panel, the GoDaddy domain control panel of victim domains. And rather than doing the really noisy thing of like repointing the main website, all they do is add subdomains for the domains. So they may add www2 dot whatever, and then they have that subdomain in turn do a redirect to a server hosting an exploit kit. And the idea is that, when they are socially engineering people through emails or whatever, it is a very legitimate looking domain. The root domain is, an established, recognizable organization. And so, that may help it get through web proxy or web filters and other things like that. So, pretty clever and difficult to detect if you're the organization this has happened to. It really points back to the need to have a good handle on your domain account, right? We've seen over and over and over again, and we continue to see accounts, and usually this results in some really big nasty domain takeover, like we've seen happen quite a lot. But for a lot of reasons, it's very important to have your domains hosted at a registrar where, number one, you have confidence that the domain registrar itself isn't going to get hacked, and that you have the ability to properly secure your account with two-factor or what have you.
And, perhaps some sort of third-party monitoring for making sure your DNS records aren't being munged with.
Yeah, again, though, that's a difficult thing, because if they're adding A records, it's unless you're able to do zone transfers somewhere else, unless you're supporting zone transfers for some third party to do an inspection, which I guess could happen. I don't know if that's a common thing.
I'm trying to think. There were some services out there. We don't typically talk vendors on the show, but I do know there's some DNS monitoring services out there to track this kind of thing. I don't know how effective they are, but it's probably worth looking into.
Yeah.
I mean, DNS is such a powerful avenue for attack, and it's very, very quiet if you don't know about it.
Right.
Especially if your zone files are off your network environment. Somebody could break those and repoint traffic, and you would have no idea, because everything looks fine on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when you've got cached records out there and time to live. A lot of people set 3 days on their zone files. And so you might have 3 days where you think everything's fine.
Right. Looks good to me. Yeah.
So, I do know that there's some services I remember playing around with that have various points out on the net that are, pinging inbound, checking DNS from various locations, that kind of thing. Maybe worth taking a look at. I do think DNS is one of those really vulnerable services that we probably don't spend enough time thinking and worrying about.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. All right, our next story is, carrying on with the theme of CSO Online. Insurance firm Stay Secure fined £175,000 for unbelievable credit card hack. And boy, this seems like it would just be totally impossible, since aren't they using chip and pin over in Europe? Oh, that's right. Chip and pin doesn't work for card not present transactions.
Shh.
Oops.
Oh, and by the way, Apple Pay makes for card not present fraud real easy.
It makes the fraud side easy, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think it does a pretty good job of everything I've read. It does a pretty good job of protecting your transaction, but it makes the job of a money mule pretty easy.
Your mom does a good job protecting my transaction.
Whatever. Mr. Kellett.
She's going to stop listening to the show now.
Or maybe not.
We'll be down to 23 listeners.
All right. So the deal here is, back in 2013, some attacker managed to install a JavaScript backdoor on the website of this company, Stay Secure, and apparently they're I believe they're a travel insurance provider, and so what this backdoor allowed the attackers to do was, essentially have their way with the company's database, which of course contained unencrypted credit card numbers and CVV numbers and, whatever else you could possibly imagine. Yeah, and so the unbelievable part that was mentioned in the title comes from the head of the ICO, which is I think it's the Information Compliance Office, if I'm not mistaken, in the UK, and this organization, Stay Secure, did not have a process for patching its systems, and the attackers at the time leveraged a 3-year-old vulnerability in the JBoss application server. So, it's the thing that struck me the hardest here is, in this day and age, there are still organizations out there that struggle with things like patch processes. And I think we generally take it for granted that it is out there, but I think this is a cautionary tale, both from a consumer standpoint, but also from from an organizational standpoint, that especially in larger organizations, a lot of times they're very autonomous, and some different parts may not have, quote, a patching process, or even your vendors may not have a patching process. And so this is a difficult problem, because it's really hard to understand who specifically, unless you're going to go off and do your own pen tests of all of your business partners and whatnot. It's difficult to know where you stand and where these kinds of weaknesses are. But this again highlights some really fundamental bad hygiene still existing out in the industry.
Sure, there's a whole bunch of people look at patching as a risk. It might break something.
Oh, especially, and I do want to. I'm going to go there, right? Especially with these application servers.
Yeah.
The Oracles and the JBoss. I've not had a lot of first-hand experience with JBoss, but I know a lot of the other big heavyweight applications. It's miserable to patch those things.
Well, I've definitely heard talk of folks also who are struggling with just cleaning up Poodle, because you've got to patch the application server in a pretty radical way. And when you've done a lot of heavy development, there's a lot of testing, regression testing to figure out what's going to break.
Right.
And it's not as simple as just throwing a patch on there. But at the same time, you can't just ignore it.
Absolutely.
You've got to build this stuff with the mindset that you're going to have to patch. I mean, look at what we're going through right now with SSL.
Yeah, I was just about to say, if there's one thing I've learned, is that we need to dump SSL and just go back straight HTTP.
Well, it would make, DLP a lot easier. It would make IDS easier. Less load on load balancers.
So there is a theory that says, one way to dramatically improve the safety of driving and reduce crashes is to install a sharp spike in the steering wheel that's pointed straight at the driver.
I predict an early huge spike in deaths, and then
followed by
a good drop-off.
A significant drop-off. That's right.
Right. And then also a strengthening of the genetic material left in the gene pool.
Ouch. So, SSL is... Anyway, I didn't mean to just derail your...
Well, no, I mean, the funny part is that, this is one point I make. Great, you've got HTTPS turned on. You haven't done anything to inherently secure your site. You've just made the attacks against it encrypted. Congratulations.
Yeah. The little lock icon means all sorts of stuff, right?
So it's one thing that drove me crazy when Google said that sites that have HTTPS are going to be ranked higher. Why? That doesn't make... Okay, so their data in motion is more secure, granted, but that doesn't make the site inherently more secure.
No, I think to be perfectly honest, one of the really big threat vectors that I interpret SSL as addressing in the commodity space is effectively traffic altering. So man in the middle traffic altering your ISPs, doing ad insertion, and the coffee shop attack.
Because that never happens over SSL.
Well, not until your PC manufacturer installs a root cert, for everything. But
so anyway, back to this insurance firm. So they didn't patch JBoss. That was the initial unpatched vulnerability that the bad guys went after.
Right.
And the insurance or the ICO said, "You were stupid. Here's a £175,000 fine for not patching."
That's right. Patch your crap, kids.
As well as incompetently securing data in the database and not detecting these errors until it was too late.
I do have to wonder, how much did Stay Secure save by not having people
Stay sure.
Stay sure. I'm sorry. Stay sure.
Drunk boy.
Whatever. I do wonder, how much did they save more than they were fined?
That's an interesting question. Well, now you got to factor in the bad press and loss of business.
But there are people who will say there is no such thing as bad press.
True. I think Bill Cosby would disagree.
Well, wait a year and we'll see.
There might be room for Jello again.
Yes.
Anywho, that's an interesting question, and and I don't mean this in any sort of disrespectful way, but that is the game executives have to play, right? Weigh that risk versus the cost versus the likely outcome on all security decisions.
Somebody just stumbled over a Llama Borghini. Breaking news. Sorry.
I hadn't listened to that podcast, by the way. I wasn't sure where it got into the show. Just the thing about that joke, and if you don't know what we're talking about, Jerry told a really bad joke. And so it was on the head end of what, 106, 107?
107, yeah.
And so as soon as you start the show, there's the joke. Like no opening, no nothing. Just that's the first thing you hit. It's kind of jarring. It's kind of shocking. It's kind of like walking on your 87-year-old grandmother naked. It just, wow, you weren't ready for that.
It's edgy. I like to think of it as edgy and whatever. Anyway, so yeah, also moving on to another story that involves really bad hygiene. Oh, go ahead. You got more?
No. I was just motioning.
Oh, okay.
Carry on.
Hillary Clinton ran.
Bad hygiene?
Bad cyber hygiene.
Oh, cyber. Where's the tip jar? Buck in the tip jar.
So this one comes from Huffington Post. That's number 2 for Huffington Post. Hillary Clinton ran a homebrew computer system for official emails.
Now, Jerry, this seems suspiciously like a political story.
Well, it absolutely is a political story, but it is an interesting parable because I think many of us can relate to this, can't we? So, and I'm going to skip ahead because this kind of goes to the point, right?
Well, let's frame this up, right? So she was supposed to be, in theory, using State Department email system.
Correct.
And instead, set up her own MX and her own mailbox and her own server at home with her own domain.
Apparently at her house.
Right, her own house. Right.
ClintonMail.com, I believe, is what it is.
Yeah, I've never heard what domain it actually was.
I think it's ClintonMail.com, if I'm not mistaken.
Huh, okay. And use that instead for official business.
Yes, that's apparently what has happened. And so, especially for those people who are not in the U.S. and maybe those in the U.S. who are not really familiar, there is a requirement for official government business to be, to be discoverable and, be provided upon request. And
Yeah, it's
so,
like the Open Records Act.
right.
So all non-classified government, everything eventually must be public
Right.
available.
Right. And so, so one of the deal here is that there's a pretty nasty political brouhaha going on about the, what was it, the Libya? Was it
Benghazi?
Benghazi, the attack.
Libyan, the consulate or
The ambassador was killed, right?
Right, along with 3 others, at an attack on our embassy in Benghazi, Libya. Yes.
Right, and so there's there's obviously pitchforks and torches because there's lots of allegations flying around that it wasn't the threat was downplayed or whatever, right? I'm not going to get into that point, but the Congress is trying to get records about what about all this information.
What did she know, and when did she know it?
Exactly, and apparently her email has to come from a different place because she was not using the official email system. And it's also kind of an interesting joke because for a long time it was a bit of a meme where she was always seen with her stupid BlackBerry sending emails.
Wow, we're never getting hired by BlackBerry now.
Yeah, well, anyway, so the other interesting thing is that the other story we have comes from theguardian.com. There was a ambassador to Kenya named Scott Gratian who was fired. And one of the reasons he was fired, or one of the cited reasons for him being fired, was that he used his Gmail account for official business, for official State Department business. And so he's, he's obviously kind of all bent out of shape that, hey, I was fired for this, and they're the boss was doing the very same thing. How hypocritical is that? This isn't intended to be a big government thing, right? I think, to me, and I suspect to many of us, we've wrestled with cases where the executive teams have wanted to go off and do their own thing for convenience. And I think this kind of underscores the difficulty that we can sometimes have. And I will also go on to say that, it's kind of interesting, and I don't think there's necessarily anything behind it or any deeper meaning, right? But the State Department keeps having to shut down its email system because they can't get hackers out of their network.
So here's the question. How secure do we think this mail system was?
Well, let me answer that by asking a counterpoint. If all of her emails have to be public record anyway, does it actually matter?
Time matters.
Well,
when they become public record.
That's a fair point.
If they're in the middle of sensitive negotiations and sensitive discussions.
Yeah.
And I would imagine there's probably some process by which certain emails or certain documents can be marked as classified, I would imagine. However, I don't know how that would happen now that they're off system. But hell, if I'm a general and I'm making notes in my notebook, that notebook could become classified. Right? So the medium doesn't necessarily matter from a classification standpoint.
Right.
But so here's the problem. And I'm not saying the State Department has their shit together. Clearly they don't. But obviously email security is not a core competency of Hillary Clinton. And I'm assuming somebody probably built this up for her. I don't think she's a Linux hobbyist. I'm assuming. And I don't know. But so depending on the consultant hired, it could have been set up very securely. Or it could have been set up very badly.
Yep.
And in some cases might have been more secure than what the State Department had going. I don't know. But in general, my gut is that an individual doing this probably wouldn't spend the same amount of time and attention as a dedicated IT team. Probably.
Yeah, and if you consider let's just take a step back and say, consider the case of, this wasn't, let's say this was not the State Department. It is your company. If you are sued, you are liable, or you have to supply records, right, that are requested. And sometimes those records might not be on a system that you manage, because if your employees are off running off doing this kind of stuff, that makes it really difficult for you. You still have an obligation to go collect that data.
That's true. I think ultimately, I'm not in support of whether you're a State Department employee or a private company employee that you go off and do your own mail system for work, business type purposes, right? And people will disagree with this, and that's okay. But ultimately, that business owns that facility.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing work on behalf of that business, they technically own that communication.
That's right.
If you don't like it, don't work for that business. But you don't get to have both complete privacy and lack of transparency and also work on behalf of that business. Part of what you give up when you go get that paycheck is your business gets to watch your email. And if you don't like it, don't take that job. Yeah. So if I were a leader in an organization and I had an employee who said, I'm not going to use company email, I'm going to go use my own email for official business, I would not allow that. Now, if they have a legitimate concern, I certainly would hear them out and work to address it. But ultimately, that would be a non-starter. So if they want to do it on their own for their own stuff, hey, rock on. But as a business, because, now mind you, Secretary of State's a different position, but in general, if that individual who's in that role were to quit or get run over by a bus or move to North Korea or whatever, I may need that. I'm hiring them to do a job. I may need that information.
Absolutely.
So
it's a business tool. It's a business facility as you described it, and for so many reasons, more than we can possibly cover in a podcast. It's just a bad idea to do this. So,
and that's, by the way, not even talking politics at all. I wouldn't care if this was Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, Socialist, whatever. I don't think it's a good idea.
Agreed.
So, however, in this case, who knows? It maybe through happenstance, this email ended up being more secure because it wasn't on the hacked all to hell State Department servers. But that is a matter of coincidence, not a matter of policy.
Exactly. So that is the stories we have for this evening. And as usual, we appreciate you hanging in with us. If you are in the Atlanta area and going to B-Sides, or even if you're not in the Atlanta area and going to B-Sides, we really hope we have an opportunity to catch up with you. And if nothing else, look for us. I suspect we'll be wearing our fancy defensive security swag, and maybe we'll have pens and stickers and magnets and stuff to give away,
or bag for you to take.
Yeah,
please.
Right. That's right. Anyway, thanks again, and we'll talk again next week. Hope to see you Saturday at B-Sides Atlanta, and take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Bye. Shoulder replacement surgery already, huh?
Well, it's part one of becoming a cyborg. Somebody has to hunt Sarah Connor.
Similar thing happened to a reporter a couple years ago.
Yeah, but that's reporters, so they can burn in hell.
The iRazor, how the analog razors are dead, and we need internet connected razors with apps. And the iCar, I was really disappointed that the iCar didn't get announced today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.